It's not clear just how many French troops are defending Orleans, but we know that the city, population 30,000, has a civil militia that actively participates in the fighting. The English would need 10,000 or even 15,000 men to take the city. But the Kingdom of England is in great financial difficulty and has been unable to send more than about 5,000.
The defender is inherently superior, which is why the old rule of thumb, still taught today to second lieutenants in training in every modern military, is if you're going to attack, you need a minimum of 3 to 1.
Why then, in these conditions, embark upon such a perilous adventure? After all, the English already control the whole of northern France.
I think it's fair to say the English had the upper hand in France. Now was the moment for a big push into the territory controlled by the Dauphin. That meant really attacking the fortresses along the River Loire. And Orléans, of course, was the main target as the main bridgehead and town on that river.
The war between the crowns of France and England has been going on for almost a century. It first broke out in 1337 with a dynastic quarrel when the King of England wished to assert his rights to the throne of France.
This was not so much a quarrel between nations, more a quarrel about inheritance. The King of England was descended from the kings of France, and he wanted to sit on the throne of France in place of his cousin. It was as simple as that.
But the true reasons for this conflict lie elsewhere. The war, which historians will later call the 100 Years' War, was first and foremost a turf war. The King of England has inherited the rich province of Guyenne on French soil, which the King of France wants to recover at all costs. A King of France whose wealth overshadows his cousin in England.
More fundamentally, the main purpose of England's invasion in the 14th century is England is a poor, scrabby, backward kingdom compared to France. And the English come to plunder. They're land pirates. They're land pirates.
With the military successes and setbacks of the two belligerents, large portions of French territory would pass hands from one crown to another. In 1428, just before the start of the siege, England controlled all the provinces north of the Loire. Paris and the Ile-de-France were acquired from them. After being passed from hand to hand, Guyenne fell into those of the King of England. It's ironic. The Kingdom of France, so rich and powerful, is in the process of being dismembered by an England on the brink of bankruptcy.
The military situation was also complicated by the fact that it was much more difficult and much more expensive to occupy a territory, and occupying Normandy and the Ile-de-France with emerging resistance movements was very expensive.
In the early summer of 1428, the Duke of Bedford launches a major offensive southward from Normandy. The objective: to reunite Guyenne with the English possessions north of the Loire by annexing all the territories that separate them and have remained faithful to the King of France, starting with Orleans. September the 4th, and the siege of Orleans has just begun. The English are in a strong position since they managed to take the bridge of the turrets. But an unexpected event is about to upset the well-oiled campaign plan of the English. The day after the capture of the turrets, while Salisbury, the captain of the English troops, inspects Orleans' defenses, he is hit in the head by a ball fired from the ramparts.
It seemed some kid fired off a bombard, and the gunners arrived a bit later, saw the kid running away, the cannon smoking, and so on.
and a cannonball entered the window and severely wounded Salisbury, and he died from that a few days later.
The English army, now deprived of its leader, is lost. Nearly 4,000 men stand under the ramparts of Orleans, not knowing what to do. They expect it to be paid until the end of December 1428. They're prepared for a 3-month siege. It will last nearly 7. And on top of their disappointment, there are some pretty questionable strategic plans. For there is a method commonly used during sieges at that time that could have brought down the city much more quickly. The mine, an absolute nightmare for the besieged.
So you tunnel under the wall, you make a cavity under the wall, you fill that cavity with firewood, animal carcasses. If you put a pig in there, for instance, the melting fat from the pig increases the heat of the flame, and the flames crack the stone, and then the walls fall into the cavity, and then you breathe.
So obviously the miners weren't being used.
Pourquoi? On ne sait pas.
We don't really know why.
Est-ce que les fossés
Were the ditches in front of the walls too deep? Too deep for sappers to be really effective? In any case, there were no mining operations.
After the death of their leader, the English linger for a few days under the walls of the city, out of reach of the guns of Orleans. Then they retreat several kilometers back, leaving only a few dozen men garrisoned in the fort of the turrets. The French immediately seize the chance to get out of their walls. And then they make a surprising decision to raze all the buildings of their own suburbs.
So, as was traditional at the time, many of the buildings in the suburbs had been cleared to avoid giving shelter to the besieging troops, and also to provide cover if they were approaching the walls.
But the English aren't about to give up. They need to change their strategy. They know what they have to do: surround the city. The 4,000 British soldiers return in force to take a position all around the city. If they can't take Orleans by storm, they'll try to isolate it and starve its inhabitants. They set out to build a fortified camp in a belt around Orleans. Small buildings protected by ditches that should allow them to cut off the city from all supplies.
It was a kind of no man's land of half-destroyed buildings and half-destroyed churches, and it was where the English would settle in.
In 4 months, they will build 9, a true feat of military engineering. First, to the east, the Bastille Saint-Loup. It overlooks the Loire and cuts off the road to Burgundy. Then, almost opposite to the west, the Bastille of Saint-Jean-le-Blanc. South of the fort of the Tourelles is the Bastille of the Augustinians. To the southwest, that of Saint-Privé. Going north, they build a 5th Bastille in the middle of the river on the islet of Charlemagne. On the right bank, the Bastille of the Croix-Boisée blocks the road to Blois. Further north, the Bastilles of Fort London and Fort Rouen close the road to Châteaudun, and Fort Paris, the road to the capital.
A Bastille was like a small fortress, and they were usually, or at least wherever they could, built around an existing building, around a church, for example. All they had to do was dig a ditch. The earth from the ditch was used to make an embankment, and on this embankment, they built a stockade.
Life in one of these wooden bastilles that were made by the English. They were sort of rather like IKEA pack furniture. These were wooden constructions, and pretty miserable to spend your life in there watching for the French. Rather boring life as a soldier.
Stuck there in their bastilles, living in precarious conditions and idle, the English fighters lose their edge. The troops' morale steadily declines.
In their Bastilles, the English were almost as much the besieged as the besiegers. It wasn't easy for them to get out, again, because they didn't have sufficient numbers.
To build the English Bastille, a huge effort to do this, but that doesn't get you over the walls. That doesn't get you into the city. It's as if they were relying on the threat of an assault to sort of frighten the defenders and counting on the weakness of France, the weakness of the king not to reinforce, so that they were expecting a surrender.
But the English must realize that Orleans has no intention of surrendering. And on the other hand, that their encircling strategy has flaws.
Surprisingly enough, I've come across no reference to any construction of any bridges or even pontoon bridges to allow communication between the different parts of the besieging army. So bringing support to one which was under attack was problematic.
But the English make another mistake, a mistake that will cost them dearly. Their plan is incomplete. They haven't built a Bastille in the northeast, a stroke of luck for Orleans. Thanks to this gap in the English encirclement, there's still an access to the city. As a result, it will never be fully blockaded.
The commanders could come and go virtually at their ease.
So there were many sorties by both sides. There was even a tournament held at one point. But I think the most important thing for both sides, both the French in Orléans and the English, was getting food supplies.
For after 4 months of siege, food and ammunition stocks are at an all-time low. It's an impasse. And for the French, it's time to go on the offensive. At the beginning of February 1429, the French captains learn that a convoy of 300 carts loaded with flour and dried herring has departed from Chartres to supply the English.
They decided to strike, to stop the convoy of fish getting through.
They're unprepared and poorly coordinated, and they're up against a convoy defended by determined, seasoned Englishmen. The raid, which has gone down in history as the Battle of the Herrings, is a shameful fiasco for the French captains.
It boosted English hopes that they would get the food into the siege camp at Orléans, and it wouldn't be too long before Orléans would fall to them.
It's a heavy blow for the French camp. But the English haven't won the game yet, and despite the fresh supplies, their morale is at an all-time low. There are more and more desertions.
Orléans was a big bite to take, a big bite to eat. The advantage, of course, with Orléans was that it opened up the prospect of moving farther into the south and towards Bourges, which was in effect the capital of the Dauphin. Many rather pejoratively referring to him as the King of Bourges.
This little King of Bourges is Charles VII, a king without a crown, who inherited a kingdom in tatters. For as well as this war against the English, he has a civil war on his hands. The situation was further complicated when, in October 1422, the Dauphin proclaimed himself King of France under the name of Charles VII. But to be a legitimate king, you had to be crowned at Reims.
It's the combination of the divine right of kings with the specific mediation of a coronation, which gives a king a priest-like quality.
People expected God to intervene in daily affairs, in the affairs of kings, and in the affairs of battle.
But Reims, like Paris, is in the hands of the Burgundians, and thus the English. Charles VII can't go there, so he's condemned to remain the little King of Bourges. By 1428, his troops have recaptured Chinon, and he set up his court there. It is there that he learns the English are besieging Orleans, and it's there that he is to make a decisive encounter. a young peasant woman from Lorraine, dressed like a man and with the hairstyle of a boy, arrives to inform him that God is on his side. They call her Joan of Arc. A young girl who knows nothing about warcraft has decided to end the siege of Orleans. At just 17 years old, she will turn the tide of the war and leave her mark on the history of France forever. She grew up in Domremy, a village wedged between Champagne and Lorraine, in an enclave loyal to the Dauphin, but surrounded by Burgundian lands. Since the age of 13, she has been having mystical visions and hearing voices. Voices that urge her to throw the English out of France and to lead the Dauphin to Reims to be rightly crowned king. She manages to meet the king and tell him of her vision.
She had to pass a test to be considered a true prophet, and she did. A prophet then had to give a sign, and the sign Joan gave was that the siege of Orleans would be lifted.
Does the king really think he's under orders from heaven? One thing's for sure, though. After meeting Joan of Arc, Charles VII provides her with weapons and horses and sends her to Orleans.
But that in the end, she was able to persuade his councillors and his advisors, and indeed the church, that perhaps there was something in what she was saying. And I don't know, here, this is just entirely my speculation, but I suppose it had got to the point was, well, why not give it a try? Who knows? It might just work.
Joan leaves Chinon and makes a stopover at Tours, where she is equipped with her armor and banner. A banner made according to order for her, with golden fleur-de-lis on a white background, along with the words, Jesus, Mary. She stops again at Blois, where she joins a convoy of supplies for the inhabitants of Orleans, escorted by 500 men. Along the way, she dictates a letter addressed to the King of England and sends it to the besiegers. The letter says,
I say to you in God's name, go home to your own country. If you do not do so, beware of the maid and of the damages you will suffer.
But there were quite a lot of other rude allusions that basically, in modern parlance, was get the hell out of here. What the hell do you think you're doing in this country? It was very abrupt and very direct.
The English must have thought that she was completely crazy, and that the French were lost if they trusted this girl who was obviously as mad as a hatter.
I think they would have said, who is this loony? What the hell is this? Yeah? But I think we can see that what Charles and his advisors were doing were trying to combine all of this and make it something much more than a military maneuver. It was really a crusade.
Their argument was obviously that Joan of Arc had arrived saying she was there in the name of God. And God was against the English, and the English obviously didn't agree.
her letter is a brilliant piece of propaganda. By writing it, this unknown peasant girl gives a call to battle to all the Dauphin Charles's supporters. If God truly is on her side, then she will indeed be the liberator of Orleans, and consequently of the whole kingdom of France. Orleans has run out of food. French reinforcements must at any price get into the city.